The year is 1960. A Norwegian explorer and his wife stand in the fog-covered ruins of what locals call the Old Indian Camp on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Helga Ingstad and Anne Stein are searching for something that most scholars insist doesn't exist. They're looking for proof that Europeans reached America 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus ever set sail. What they find buried in the cold Canadian earth will rewrite history books around the world. But let's go back, way back, to the frozen fjords of Scandinavia in the late 900s. Erik the Red has a problem. He's been kicked out of Iceland for murder. Not his first offense either. This hot-tempered Viking with the flaming red hair and beard had already been expelled from Norway for the same reason. Now he's sailing west into the unknown Atlantic, desperate to find somewhere, anywhere that will take him. After days at sea, he spots something rising from the mist. Mountains, ice, land. He calls it Greenland, though it's mostly covered in ice. Smart marketing. Erik knows that a nice name might convince other settlers to join him in this frozen wasteland. And it works. Within a few decades, around 2,000 Vikings were living in Greenland. They build farms, raise sheep, and trade walrus ivory back to Europe. But here's the thing about Vikings. They don't stop exploring. They can't. It's in their blood. They've already sailed up rivers into the heart of Russia, traded in Constantinople, and raided monasteries from Ireland to France. The Atlantic Ocean is just another challenge. Around the year 985, a young merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson was sailing from Iceland to Greenland to visit his father, but he gets lost in the fog. When the mist finally clears, Bjarni sees land to the west. Not Greenland, something else. Forested hills, no ice, but Bjarni doesn't stop. He's a merchant, not an explorer. He turns his ship around and keeps sailing until he finds Greenland. When he arrives, he tells everyone about the mysterious land he spotted. Most people forget about it, but one man doesn't. Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, can't stop thinking about Bjarni's story. Leif is different from his father, calmer, more calculating. He buys Bjarni's ship and gathers a crew of 35 men. Around the year 1000, they sailed west. First, they find a land of flat stones. They call it Helluland, which means stone slab land. Today we know it as Baffin Island. They don't stay. Nothing grows there. They keep sailing south. Next they find a forested coast, trees everywhere. They call it Markland, forest land. This is probably Labrador. The crew needs timber, so they load up the ship. But Leif wants to go further. They sail south again for 2 more days. Then they find it. A place with rivers full of salmon bigger than any they've seen before. Meadows of wild grass. And somewhere in their travels, probably further south along the coast, they find grapes growing wild on vines. The exact location remains a mystery. Wild grapes don't produce as far north as Newfoundland. Leif calls this place Vinland, Wineland, because of those grapes. Whether Vinland refers to just one place or the entire region they explored, historians still debate. They build houses, big timber halls with thick walls. They stay through the winter. After months in this new land, they sail home to Greenland loaded with timber and stories. Leif becomes known as Leif the Lucky. Everyone wants to see this new land. His brother Thorvald takes a crew the next year. But Thorvald's luck runs out. The Vikings encounter people they call Skraelings. We don't know exactly who these people were. Maybe ancestors of the Mi'kmaq or Beothuk peoples. The meeting goes badly. Violence breaks out. Thorvald takes an arrow and becomes the first European to die in North America. His crew buries him in Vinland and sails home. But the expeditions don't stop. A merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni leads an even bigger group. Men, women, and livestock. 60 or 70 people total. They're not just exploring anymore. They want to settle permanently. They build farms. They trade with the local people. exchanging red cloth for furs. Then Thorfinn's wife, Gudrid, gives birth to a son named Snorri, the first European child born in North America. For a while, things seem peaceful. Then the violence returns. More fights with the Skraelings, more deaths. The Vikings realize something crucial. They're outnumbered, way outnumbered. Yes, they have iron weapons and armor, but the local people know the land. They have the numbers. After 3 years, Thorfinn makes the hard choice. They pack up and sail back to Greenland. Now here's where the story gets strange. For centuries, these Viking voyages to America were just sagas, stories told around fires, written down in Iceland in the 1200s. Most historians dismissed them as myths, fantasy tales. After all, where was the proof? Columbus discovered America in 1492. Everyone knew that. The history books said so. Children learned it in school. But a few people believed the sagas were real. They spent years searching the coast of North America, looking for any trace of Viking settlement. They found nothing until 1960. Helga Ingstad and Anne Stein, those Norwegian explorers we met at the beginning, start digging at Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland. They find something immediately. Underneath the grass are ruins, not native structures, not from later European settlements. These buildings have a Viking design. Long halls with thick turf walls, the same style Vikings built in Greenland and Iceland. They keep digging. They find a bronze pin used to fasten a cloak, the exact type of Vikings wore. Then a stone lamp, a spindle whorl for spinning yarn, iron nails made in the Viking style. And most importantly, they find evidence of a forge, a place where Vikings worked iron. The local people didn't work with iron. This could only mean one thing. Vikings lived here. The sagas were true. But Anne Stein notices something else, something that proves this isn't just a fishing camp or temporary shelter. She finds the spindle whorl. This tool was used to spin wool into yarn. Only women used spindle whorls. The Vikings only brought women on one type of voyage, settlement voyages. This wasn't just exploration. Vikings tried to create a permanent colony in North America, exactly like the sagas described. The discovery sends shockwaves through the academic world. Vikings reached America 500 years before Columbus. The history books needed rewriting. Yet here's a question nobody expected. If Vikings made it to America, and even tried to settle there, why did they leave? Why didn't they stay? Why isn't North America speaking Norse languages today? The answer tells us something important about exploration and survival. Distance matters. Greenland sits about 1,500 miles from Norway, already a massive journey for Viking ships. But Vinland lies another 1,500 miles beyond Greenland. That's 3,000 miles total from home. Every nail, every tool, every weapon had to come from Greenland or Iceland or Norway. If something broke, you couldn't just order a replacement. The supply line stretched too far. But distance wasn't the biggest problem. People were. The Vikings encountered inhabitants who didn't want strange foreigners settling on their land. And who could blame them? These were their hunting grounds, their fishing rivers, their homes. The Vikings had better armor and iron weapons, sure. But they had maybe 60 or 70 people total. The indigenous population numbered in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Every fight risked losing people the Vikings couldn't replace. Every death weakened their tiny settlement. Math isn't on their side. So after a few years, they gave up. They took their timber and furs and sailed back to Greenland. Some tried returning later, probably to gather timber. But permanent settlement? Too dangerous, too isolated, too far from help. The Greenland colonies kept going for a while. Vikings lived there for almost 500 years. They raised sheep and cattle. They hunted walrus for ivory. They traded with Europe. But slowly, things got worse. The climate changed. The medieval warm period, which made Greenland farming possible, ended. Temperatures dropped, ice expanded, growing seasons are shortened. Supply ships from Iceland and Norway came less often, then stopped completely. The Black Death hit Europe in the 1300s, killing millions. Iceland and Norway had their own problems. They forgot about their distant cousins in Greenland. By 1450, the last Viking settlement in Greenland stood empty. The people either died or left. Nobody knows for sure. And the knowledge of Vinland died with them. Or did it? The sagas survived in Iceland, copied by monks, preserved in books. But most of Europe never heard these stories. Italy didn't know. Spain didn't know. England didn't know. So when Columbus sailed west in 1492, he thought he was finding something new. And in a way, he was. His voyage changed history because it led to permanent contact between Europe and America. The Vikings touched America, but left barely a trace. Columbus opened a door that never closed again. But let's talk about something the textbooks often skip. Columbus wasn't really trying to discover new land. He thought he'd reached Asia, the Indies. That's why he called the people he met Indians. He died still believing he'd found a route to China and Japan. He never knew he'd stumbled onto continents Europeans had forgotten about. Meanwhile, Leif Erikson knew exactly where he was going. A new land, different from anything in Europe or Asia. The sagas say so clearly. In some ways, Leif understood his discovery better than Columbus understood his. Here's another question historians ask. Could others have reached America even earlier? Irish legends tell of St. Brendan the Navigator, who sailed west in the 500s. Modern experiments prove that a leather boat like the one Irish monks used could make the journey. But without archaeological evidence, these remain interesting stories, nothing more. The Vikings left proof. That makes all the difference. What we know for certain is this. The Vikings created the first proven European contact with North America. They interacted with indigenous peoples. They traded, fought, and tried to build a life in this new land. They failed at permanent settlement, but they succeeded at something equally important. They showed it could be attempted, and more discoveries keep coming. In 2016, archaeologists found possible evidence of a second Viking site in Newfoundland. Using satellite imagery, they spotted shapes in the ground at a place called Point Rosy. They started digging. They found roasted bog iron, a material Vikings made to forge tools. But other archaeologists aren't convinced yet. They think the iron might be natural. The debate rages on. Maybe Vikings explored further south than we thought. Maybe Lance o' Meadows was just their base camp, and they traveled much more widely. Or maybe it really was their only settlement. Here's what makes the Viking discovery so fascinating. They did it without compasses, without accurate maps, without any of the navigation tools Columbus had. They used the sun and stars. They watched birds and whales. They memorized currents and wind patterns. They were master sailors who turned their small wooden ships into vehicles of exploration that rivaled anything built centuries later. A Viking longship could sail in water just 3 feet deep. They could beach it on any shore, flip it over, and use it as shelter. They could sail up rivers into the heart of continents. They could cross the open ocean when they had to. These ships combined speed, flexibility, and toughness in ways European vessels wouldn't match for hundreds of years. But technology alone didn't make the Vikings successful explorers. Culture did. Viking society praised brave journeys into unknown lands. Their gods rewarded boldness. Their poems celebrated explorers. Young men gained fame and respect by sailing to strange places and returning with stories. This cultural push drove them further and further from home, east into Russia, south into the Mediterranean, west across the Atlantic. They didn't explore because they had better ships. They had better ships because they valued exploration.